So a lot of questions have been raised about the use of biotechnology, especially as we start realizing how much we can do with biotechnology. There are a lot of questions about, what should we do? Should we actually do everything that we are able to? So a lot of questions have been raised about the safety of genetically modified crops, okay, so GMOs. Most of them currently have been modified to basically use different pesticides, so they are more effective against insects and different pests. There is some question about the spread of undesirable genes if they basically create a virus that delivers different genes to different people. Maybe that gene gets mutated and then you have a whole huge issue going on. Decrease in biodiversity. So again, we'll see this more when we talk about genetics. But if you decrease biodiversity, oftentimes you end up with a weaker population. And so there is that concern that if you're selecting for specific genes or genetically modifying something, you could actually decrease the biodiversity and end up weakening the population on accident. And then there are ethical considerations. So there is one video that you should have watched about designer babies. That is a huge ethical consideration that we have of, well, yeah, we can select for different genes, things like that, but should we? Is that ethical? Is that moral? All of that. So over the past 50 years, our biological knowledge has greatly increased. And this is like leaps and bounds ahead of where it was even just a couple decades ago. So as a result, we are faced with new and more challenging questions. As it often does when there is a huge question about something in science, it kind of works its way into popular culture. In this case, I'm talking about Jurassic Park. Okay, so Jurassic Park, if you've never seen it, never read the book, I would suggest that you should. It is really good. But with Jurassic Park, they found some DNA in a fossil from a dinosaur. It was actually in a mosquito that had been preserved in amber from the time of the dinosaurs. And so what they did was that they extracted that DNA and then figured out ways to kind of patch it up because it was a little damaged, and then grew dinosaurs. So they brought dinosaurs back into our world. And they didn't necessarily think about the consequences of that, which becomes pretty abundantly clear in any of the Jurassic Park movies. But there is one quote that always kind of sticks with me from the book, and it's spoken by the mathematician of the story, but it says, "Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they never stopped or they didn't stop to think if they should." So there is always that question of, well, we might be able to do this, but is that actually something we should do? Would it help or just make things worse? So talking about biology and questions, there are still many questions that we really do need to answer in biology. Questions that we don't understand quite yet, or we don't understand everything about them. So one of the major ones is a question about how memories are stored in the brain. There are a lot of questions about how the brain works that we don't know the answers to, but if you can tell how memories are stored in the brain, then if you get a patient with amnesia, so they can't remember anything, you might be able to help them restore those memories. Because if they're still stored there, the patient just can't access them, then knowing how they're stored might help you figure out how to help the patient reaccess those memories. Or if you have a patient with severe PTSD, maybe you can kind of cause the brain to write over those memories that are causing that. Okay, so there are a lot of different things that we might be able to do once we figure out how memories are stored in the brain. But of course, the brain is relatively difficult to study simply because, I mean, you can't take it out of someone's head and then sit there and study it because the person would be dead and then the brain would die. So, you know, not all that easy. Another question, how do viruses mutate? We do actually know quite a bit about this, but this is talking about, you know, knowing how viruses mutate on the level that we could predict the types of mutations that they will do. That way you can kind of try to plan ahead for different outbreaks, right? So one of the, you know, it's getting close to flu season, should all be getting your flu shots. But with the flu shot, they actually have to make it a year in advance because it takes almost a year to make the vaccination. And so a year in advance, they have to try to guess at what strains of the flu will be the most prevalent. Because in one vaccination, they can only protect against 3 strains. That's the max. Okay? And so that's why oftentimes when you hear reports about the flu this year, flu season this year, they always talk about how effective the vaccination is. And that is all based on we don't know enough about how viruses mutate to be able to predict that reliably. And then, of course, the age-old question, does life exist on planets other than Earth? Now, with this question, you also have to think about, you know, it might not be life that is basically identical to what we see on Earth, okay? It's not that we're going out looking for Martians, it's more that we're looking for any signs of life. So, bacteria, okay? That would be a sign of life on another planet, okay? And then it also may not be structured the same way we are. So maybe they don't survive on oxygen, okay? Maybe they aren't carbon-based life forms, okay? So there are a lot of different questions about life on other planets. We haven't found anything yet. We have found water on different planets, which we assume at least that any form of life will need, but we don't necessarily know. So, a lot of questions there. But that is the end of this section and this chapter. So we're going to have Chapter 1 homework, and then the assessment for this section will be posted shortly, if they aren't already.